Thanks, everybody. Welcome to becoming a superhero architect of your vSphere SSO domain. Just a quick introduction. My name is Ahmad Yunus. I'm a senior technical marketing engineer at VMware. I cover the vCenter server appliance, migration from a Windows vCenter to the vCenter server appliance, and VMware Cloud on AWS. Adam?
My name is Adam Eckerly. I'm a colleague of Ahmad in tech marketing. I also cover vCenter server appliance, SSL certificates, as well as some of the architecture stuff and the web clients.
All right, so we've decided for this session we have 0 slides. We're going to talk about architecting using a whiteboard. So the goal here is we're going to start off with some basics and build upon those. And then we're going to call on you guys to give us scenarios, right? And then we're going to whiteboard those out as well. How does that sound? Blurry?
I don't know if I can do anything about that.
When you draw, is it blurry?
I don't want to. That side's good.
Okay.
Would it be possible to try to get a focus adjustment on this projector? Huh. Well, I mean,
can you guys see that? All right. So let's get started. We got a lot to cover. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to dive into some basics. The first one is we're going to talk about what's called embedded. And an embedded deployment is when you have both your platform services controller or your PSC and your vCenter residing on one virtual machine. Now, one myth that we want to debunk with the embedded is you can actually use it for production. We've talked to a lot of customers who think that the embedded is only for your lab and test environments, and that's not the case. It supports the entire scale, right, for vCenter as the external deployment, which we'll talk about later. So with the embedded, the goal here is to simplify. Everything is within one virtual machine. If you don't need enhanced link mode, and we'll talk about enhanced link mode here in a minute. If you don't need enhanced link mode, then keep it simple and use the embedded deployment.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to reiterate a slightly different way just to like really drive home this point because it's super important. Just ask yourself, like Ahmad was saying, do you want enhanced link mode? And if you're not familiar with enhanced link mode, like we're going to talk about it in a minute, but if the answer is no, you don't want to link multiple vCenters together, then there is really no reason to do anything other than what's on the screen. All right, so super important if you take anything away, don't add complexity just for the sake of adding complexity, right? Embedded PSC will work just fine.
Exactly. All right, so let's move on and let's talk about the external deployment. And with the external deployment, we have a platform services controller residing on its own virtual machine and vCenter server on its own virtual machine as well. Now, we talked briefly about enhanced link mode. With this deployment, this is where you want enhanced link mode. And what enhanced link mode buys you is the ability to have linked VCs, and when you log into any web client, whether it's VC1, VC2, VC3, I can manage all my VCs from within any web client. So for external deployments, we also have tags, custom roles, global permission, licensing, certificates, all being replicated across your vSphere SSO domain. And the beauty of this is now all I have to do is create it one time, and when I add a vCenter server, it inherits these tags, roles, global permissions, all that, licensing. So licensing I only add one time. Any vCenter added gets those licenses. You want to add anything?
Yeah, so It's really important to understand like what sort of the use case is for that, right? On its surface, maybe that doesn't sound super compelling, but if you think about, license keys is a good example, right? Some of you folks probably have a bunch of different keys, and they go across all kinds of different environments, and how do you divvy up those keys? How do you consume those keys? With enhanced link mode, as Ahmad was saying, you can put that collection of keys in one time, in one place, and then within each of your vCenter servers, you can consume those keys, a subset of those keys, what have you. So that's vCenter keys, that's ESX host keys, vSAN licensing keys, all that kind of stuff sits there at the SSO domain layer. And then, as Ahmad said, kind of waterfalls down to everything else in the environment.
So as you look at the external deployment, we have a vCenter server pointing to a platform services controller. Now keep in mind, it's a one-to-one relationship, right? But in the case of the platform services controller, it's a one-to-many. So I can have one platform services controller, and I can have up to, in the case of 6.5, up to 10 vCenter servers pointing to one platform services controller. Now, you don't want to do that because that's a single point of failure, right? But it's possible. In the case of 6.5 update 1, we allow up to 15 vCenter servers talking to one platform services controller. Again, not recommended to do, but you can do it, right? So we want to make sure that you look at the maximums guide, not only for 6.5, but 6.5 update 1, because they do change as we release. The other thing is, how many of you guys are on an external deployment? Wow. Okay. Embedded? Okay. So when we look at upgrades, you want to take a look and see where you are today and where you want to be. So in the case of 5.5, you can actually, it's the only time right now where you can consolidate SSO domains. Meaning, if I have, let's say, an SSO domain, vSphere.local, and then a separate SSO domain, vSphere.local, they can't talk, right? There's isolation there. But I want one SSO domain, so that way, when I get to 6.x, right, 6.5 update 1, I get the benefits of licensing, tags, all that being replicated across my SSO domain. So the first thing I want to do is I want to consolidate. Now, this is not a requirement. This is just a tidbit that we're letting you know in case you did want to consolidate, you can do it now in version 5.5. Once you upgrade that first node to 6.x, you're locked in.
Yep, so super important that you do this beforehand in 5.5. So again, current state, we've got 2 embedded SSO nodes, 5.5. Maybe I should jot that down. And the goal, right, is to get both of these into the same SSO domain so that we can take advantage of enhanced linked mode once we get to 6.0. So the first step is let's deploy a brand new SSO instance. Well, let me rephrase. This can be a brand new SSO instance, or it could be an SSO instance in one of these 2 SSO domains, right? And so basically what's going to happen once we get that new instance deployed, just to kind of drive home the point, let me use another color. These are in the same SSO domain now, right? There's a KB out there, and I tried to remember this the other day, 206.2.330, I believe, that talks about how to re-register a vCenter server from one SSO instance to another. And again, this is only available in 5.5, right? Do you have a question? Yeah, good idea. Thank you. 206.2.3.3. I don't know. Look it up, and if it doesn't work,
after the session, we'll tweet it out.
That doesn't look right for some reason.
Anyway. So now that we have our external SSO, the next step is we need, as Adam talked about, we need to register vCenter with our SSO. So we're going to register the vCenter service, the web client service, and the inventory service. Once that's done, we now have a consolidated SSO domain, and we can now upgrade from 5.5 all the way through 6.5.
One more step. Decommission the existing SSO instance.
Correct.
So one of the key things here is that it may not seem that important to get rid of these guys, but what happens, the upgrade tool will look at the vCenter instance and it will see that it has an embedded SSO instance, and it'll say, hey, I need to upgrade that embedded SSO instance. So if you run through the upgrade, if you upgrade your VC without decommissioning and removing the embedded SSO, you will end up and basically negate the work that you've done up to this point. You will get a 6.5 vCenter with an embedded PSC, even though you have those brand new shiny SSO instances out there. So all you need to do is go in, just if this is a Windows machine, add remove programs, uninstall vCenter SSO, and you're done. All right. If it's a VCSA, you can uninitialize SSO in 5.5.
Okay, so you said that. Okay, so you just did that same thing in the session Monday, and so that didn't sit right with me. And the reason why.
Do you mind going to the mic so we? Yeah.
I think I'm loud enough, but I'll get the microphone.
And while he's going to the mic, we're gonna go on a little bit, and then we'll come back. So now that we've upgraded to 6.5, this again, it's the only time you can consolidate. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've consolidated SSO domains, we can now upgrade. Now keep in mind, again, if this is not a requirement for you, then just go ahead and upgrade as normal with separate SSO domains. Go ahead.
Okay, so you went through that in a session on, I guess it's
Sunday.
It's only yesterday.
Yesterday.
And it didn't sit right with me. And the reason why it didn't sit right with me is because you have announced that you're deprecating the Windows vCenter server. And so all of your customers are going to be going to the appliance, but then you're only allowing the merging of SSO domains during 5.5. And at that point, most of your customers will have already upgraded to 6, right? I'm assuming that probably a majority of the people are on 6 now.
Show of hands, who's on 6?
Okay.
So you've said, okay, you can only merge your SSO domains, but you can only do it before you upgrade to 6, but after you're upgraded to 6, you're stuck. Now, that being said, with the show of hands, is it worth considering being able to merge SSO domains from in 6 so you can go to 6.5?
So again, it depends on your requirement, right? If you want a common SSO domain and have the ability to share things like tags, custom roles, global permissions, then yes, okay? And you're not really stuck, okay? You have to redeploy, yes. And you can automate it or you can do it manually, but you can still do it. This is just we give you an easy way to do it in 5.5.
So is it because SSO was rewritten in 6 that you don't know how to do it, or it's not possible to do it?
So
or there's a lot of work to be able to do it. I'll give you an example.
That's okay. In the interest of time, let me just answer the question.
Here, I'll give you a real world scenario. I've got vBlocks, and they come in, they stand up a standalone vCenter server, it manages the vBlock. Then we pop up vBlocks everywhere, and now you've got all of these disjoint vCenter servers. Now we're playing in this realm where you can link all these together now and do so many more things, but now I'm going through the pain point of having to merge this, but the chicken came before the egg and we went to vCenter 6. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, for sure, and that's a super common use case. So we're working on that, and we can't promise when or how it's going to be delivered, but that's absolutely a limitation that we want to remove from SSO. And just to give some context, It's not that we don't know how to do it. We absolutely know how to do it. But if you look at what SSO was in 5.5, 5.1, and 5.5, all it was is authentication, right? All it was is an LDAP identity source. Now SSO is tags, tag categories, custom roles, our global permissions, VEX if you're looking at certificates, and licensing. So if you think about how would you take, well, I'm not going to draw this out, but if you took a vCenter that had all of these things associated with it and moved it to a different SSO domain, how do you deal with all the conflicts of all of those objects? So it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's very, very complex and difficult. And so as we're continuing to evolve SSO, we definitely want to make sure that when we finally do allow customers to do it, that is simple, not prone to error, and all those kinds of things. So we're absolutely working on it. Yeah, good question.
If you guys don't mind, when you have a question, go to the mic. That way everybody can hear the question and they're recording. Thanks.
My question basically is, this is only a factor if you have originally SSO separate.
So the question is, this is only a factor if you have SSO separate from the vCenter. This is only a factor if you have separate SSO domains and you want to take the enhancement that we provide in 6.0 and in 6.5 of having that common SSO domain and sharing licensing, tags, global permissions, things like that. If that's something that you want, then go ahead and consolidate. If that's something you don't need, there's some environments, as we talk to customers, that they say, look, this environment needs to be isolated, right? It can't talk to another vCenter. So in that case, you stay embedded, right? And you'll have a single SSO domain for that particular vCenter.
So let me just talk about one quick thing before we move forward. Given that the vast majority of the room is already on 6.0, just to kind of shift a little bit, let's say that let's fast forward a little bit and let's look at a couple PSCs, a couple vCenters, right? Something like this, okay? And let's say we're on 6.0 and we want to go to 6.5, right? And let's say that we've got a VDI vCenter, and then we've got some general purpose, like compute vCenter, and then a vCenter for, maybe it happens to be a vBlock, right? That was an example. And so the thing with enhanced link mode that sometimes falls through the cracks is that everything within the SSO domain has to be the same version, right? You cannot mix, a 6.5 vCenter here with a 5.5 or even a 6.0 vCenter over here, right? We don't support that. So what do you do then? You want to get to 6.5, but maybe your vBlock, the RCM hasn't been updated for 6.5 yet. And so you can't upgrade that vBlock. Or maybe you're using a version of a VDI application that doesn't support 6.5 yet. So you can't upgrade that one vCenter. What that basically means is that now you're blocked from upgrading anything in the SSO domain. While we talk about enhanced link mode and all its glory and it's amazing and everything, sometimes it doesn't make sense for some use cases. So just be aware of that. As you're thinking about, do I really want all of my vCenters linked together? Because you may paint yourself into a corner that you don't want to be in. So just keep that in mind.
Right. So that goes back to the initial question when you're looking at your deployment type. Do I need enhanced link mode? Yes, no. If it's yes, then you're going to externalize. And then the next question is, do I want these vCenters which vCenters do I want within that SSO domain? And then you can start piecing them together. Okay? So let's move forward and let's talk about the construct of sites. So in 6.0 we introduced the construct of sites, and all sites are a logical boundary. A way to group my PSCs, that's it. It buys you nothing else, there's no feature tied to it. It's just a way to logically group your platform services controller. So in this example, we have 2 PSCs in the site of, I don't know, Adam, pick somewhere.
Palo Alto.
Okay. And then we have the second one in Indianapolis. They're within the same SSO domain, right? So the PSCs are replicating to each other the same information, but we have a multi-site. The PSCs bidirectionally replicate every 30 seconds, and they're multi-master. So even though we deployed the first one is not the master. None of them are, right? Multi-master. So the things like licensing, tags, global permission, all that, that's what's being replicated across your SSO domain. So if one PSC fails, you still have that information being replicated across the others. We'll talk about that a little bit later though. So now that we've deployed PSC 1, when we deploy 2, and it asks you, okay, is this an existing SSO domain or is this a new SSO domain? In this case, we're going to say existing. And then it's going to ask, okay, who's my replication partner? We're going to tell number 2, number 1 is your partner. When we deploy 3, again, we're going to say existing SSO domain, and then we're going to tell number 3, number 2 is your partner. We're going to have a nice linear topology, and so on and so forth with number 4. But what happens if we have basically a split in the path? Right? So now 1 and 2 can talk, 3 and 4 can talk, but the data can't get passed within 2 and 3. So to mitigate this, we're going to create what's called a ring. We're going to create a new replication agreement going from 4 to 1. And that way we have a secondary data path. Now one thing I want to emphasize here is this is a recommendation. It is not a requirement. If you feel like, hey, I need that secondary data path, then you're going to use VDC rep admin to create that new agreement. If you feel like, hey, I'm comfortable with this nice linear topology, then stay as you are.
I think the thing that we don't want customers to do is, again, add complexity for the sake of complexity. Don't go in and add a bunch of replication agreements and try to create a mesh or hub and spoke or anything like that, because it's a nightmare to manage, and it's another thing that you have to manually manage, right? If you add new PSCs, you're going to have to go in and add additional replication agreements to match what you've already added, and it doesn't scale very well. So the idea is keep it simple, right? Use that KISS principle.
So the next thing is, if I did want to add, let's say I had a new site and I want to add more PSCs. It's pretty simple. I'm going to add the next one to 4, right? Again, keep it nice, linear. I'm going to add 5 to 4 and then 6 to 5. But what do I do about this ring that I created already? Anybody know? So I'm not going to disconnect it yet. I'm going to create a new ring, right? New replication agreement, and then I'm going to go back and then I'm going to delete the old ring, right? Because I want to keep that data path going, create the new one, and then delete the old one. Okay, again, this is just a recommendation. It is not a requirement.
And then this, if you can read that, it says VDC rep admin. That is the command that you can run on a PSC to list replication agreements. You know, who am I replicating with? What PSCs are in the SSO domain? You can create replication agreements with it. You can also destroy replication agreements. So it's a very powerful tool. There's a KB. If you just search Google VDC rep admin, you'll go straight to the KB for this command, and it tells you, how to use it, when you might want to use it. Just be careful with it, because you can, with great power comes great responsibility. So.
What if you use the data center and
Yeah, so the question was, what if, going back a step, what if we lose, let's just say we have, our 3 sites and now we have total isolation, right? What happens, how does this affect the operations of the environment? And then once we bring those links back online, what happens? So the first thing is how does this affect the existing environment? You'll still be able to log into all the vCenters and manage everything. But if you make a change, let's say you make a change to the SSO domain, maybe add a tag, something like that. Oh, oops, what happened? Over in Palo Alto, right? That's not going to replicate over to the other sites, obviously. So then basically you'll just have to be aware of that. You could just set a policy in place that if this happens, no changes to the SSO domain, or make that same change in every place. But here's the thing. When we connect everything back together, only one site wins out. And so let's say we made that same change in all 3 sites. The change that is so what we do is we look at what the change set number is of each PSC. So every time you make a change, we increment a change set number. That's based on some sort of algorithm, and hopefully it's very unlikely that you'll have a change that has the same change set number on multiple PSCs, but let's say that happens, okay? Then we look at when the change occurred, and if you happen to make the same change at the exact same time across all those PSCs, then it's which PSC was deployed first in the environment. And that's the PSC. Basically, its SSO domain configuration is just going to ripple and overwrite everybody else's. So it's a great question, and we just have to be careful in that we understand that, so when we're in this situation, we don't go around and start making a whole bunch of changes because we have a potential that those changes could get overwritten. Does that make sense? Okay.
So along those lines, right, you talked about isolation, but what happens if my first PSC goes down in my first site? Okay. So if the first PSC goes down, I only have my secondary PSC. If I have a vCenter server, in 6.5, I can only repoint inter-site. Okay, I can't. Intra-site, so thank you. I can't repoint across sites. So what winds up happening is, to get that first PSC back, since we have, again, multi-master, same data being replicated across, I'm not going to restore from backup. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to decommission that first PSC from any other PSC, okay? Using CM SSO util. The way I remember CM SSO util is changed mind SSO utility, okay? So now I've repointed my vCenter server. I'm going to go in, use CM SSO util. I'm going to decommission the first PSC. So that way later on when I deploy it again, I can reuse my FQDN and IP address. If any one of these PSCs all the way up to 5 go down all, I do the same thing, right? Decommission and then redeploy. What happens though if I lose my entire site, like all 3 sites go down? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my backup and deploy only one PSC. Once that PSC is up, I'm going to go in, decommission the other ones, and now redeploy the other 5 PSCs. And again, the reason is PSC multi-master, kind of a throwaway per se, so there's no reason to restore from backup.
Yep. So, and I think we're getting far enough along now that if you're thinking about questions, feel free to pop up to the mics, because I think we've laid the foundation. Something that is also important, I kind of want to go back because we sort of glanced over this, if you will.
I have a quick question.
Okay, sure.
As far as for the regional or the linked ones in one site, could you do them geographically where, we'll say, side A and side B would be in the same geographic region, but that can be your 2 for that part if you're on like an MPLS, rather than having 2 in the same exact physical site. And for other reasons, obviously, if you're going to have any type of additional cloud component in that, or do you still recommend having those 2 in the same exact physical site?
Want to take it?
Sure. So I'd really look at it probably from a latency perspective. PSC to PSC latency isn't necessarily all that important because, like Ahmad said, we only replicate every 30 seconds. If you look at the data, you know, license keys aren't changing that often. You're not creating roles. You might be assigning roles and stuff in the environment, but not really creating them that often. So anyway, the data is relatively static. So PSC to PSC latency isn't that important, but it's more so vCenter to vCenter latency. So as you sort of start geographically dispersing vCenter servers within the SSO domain, then definitely look at your latency and make sure that you're not, you know, what we recommend today is 100 milliseconds between sites. So as long as you're within that, you should be okay. And hopefully in the future, we'll publish a lot more hard guidelines.
Yeah, so if you go over the 100 milliseconds, you're going to start to see some degradation when you start to authenticate. So if you look at your browser when you're logging in, it's going to flip over to the PSC, either IP address or FQDN, however you've deployed it. And once you've authenticated, it's going to flip back to VC. So depending on how far apart they are, it may take a while for that. And then once you log in, you may see a little bit of degradation as you're starting to move around and manage your environment. So keep that in mind. Another tidbit is we recommend having at least a local PSC to your vCenter server, if at all possible, right? Because they're constantly chatting back and forth.
Yeah, so and that's kind of where I was going. You know, let's say you do have this scenario, and let's say you have some sort of issue where you lose both of these PSCs in your local site. We don't even allow this anymore. You know, to repoint across that site boundary. But really the reason is that we don't allow that is because of the latency sensitivity between, you know, vCenter and PSC. As Ahmad was saying, we want you to have a local PSC to each of your vCenters. And by not allowing you to repoint across sites is one way to sort of, for us to help you protect yourselves.
So let me ask you a question, okay? What if I decide I'm going to be a little bit smarter, I'm going to cheat the system. I'm going to create one big site. What do you think of that?
That would be fully supported. But again, we don't really recommend that because for the reasons I just outlined, right? At the end of the day, it's a logical construct that is adding some limitations to this design or this architecture, but it's there for your protection. Like we just really don't want vCenters talking to remote PSCs, right? So what would be interesting is what would it look like if we just removed the SSO site construct? You know, is that something that would be interesting? Is anybody like using the SSO site construct in a way that you're just like, no, please don't remove it? Anyone? Yeah, so you know, imagine what it might be like if we just took that piece of complexity out and then, you know, add some flexibility and also still make sure we protect vCenter from the whole latency issue, but solve that problem in a little bit more elegant way.
Hold on, we got a couple of people at the...
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
So here's our dilemma. Can you hear me?
Yep. Sure.
We've got we've upgraded our virtual centers to 6.0. All of them have external PSCs. We're in the process of trying to get to 6.5. What's been recommended is that we go to. By the way, our 6.0s are all Windows, with, you know, a vCenter Windows box, then a separate box for SQL, separate box for VUM, separate SQL for VUM.
By the way, after this session, in about 30 minutes, I have a session for migrating from Windows to the appliance.
So here's in a nutshell, and maybe you can just tell me you'll cover that in the next one.
We want to get to the appliance. We want to get all those 4 boxes over, or actually 5, into one, because they recommend that we use the embedded PSC. And if we migrate, use the migrate tool, if it's an external PSC, it comes over as an external PSC.
Correct.
We don't want it to. We don't want 80 or 100 of our virtual centers to be forever using external PSCs.
Okay, so today we don't have a way to go from external to embedded, but we are going to cover that use case in the next session, I promise.
Well, I mean, is the answer in the next session going to be you can't get there?
No, the answer is
Man, he can be mean,
right?
but he's not that mean.
I wouldn't send you to the next session if I didn't have an answer for you. We're going to show you ways of getting there, right? So you could potentially deploy another vCenter server, right? And use something like cross vCenter vMotion to do something like that, right?
So, and I don't want to get myself in trouble. Maybe I should do this.
Careful, this is recorded.
Yeah, sorry. We lied. We do have one slide. It's a problem that we're trying to solve. And so it's not inconceivable that, we're working on a way to solve that and could deliver that in the future. Because it comes up a bunch. Trust me, Ahmad and I talk to engineering all the time. In fact, the PM was in one of our sessions earlier, and he was like, yeah, these guys talk to me every day about this. So we're working on it.
Yes, sir.
So I had a question about, you were talking about sites. I was wondering if you had some guidelines for determining what exactly constitutes a site. Because I have a scenario where I have 2 data centers that are in the same city with a 10 gig link. So it's not exactly your WAN link scenario. Would it be acceptable to set those up as a single site, or would we want to, because there's always that potential of our fiber breaking or whatever it is, do we want to have them in different sites? What's your guidelines for determining when to join multiple physical locations as one site or break them off as separate sites?
I would say that, do you already treat them as sort of one logical data center anyway?
No.
You don't?
No.
Okay. Then if that's the case, then I would still probably stick to my guns and say to make it 2 logical sites to align with your operational model. But in that circumstance, when you have extreme low latency between locations, I don't see too much of a problem with having one single logical SSO site, because if you were to point a vCenter across to one of those other PSCs, it should work okay. But, test, your mileage may vary, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sure.
Just real quick. So we've talked about, you've seen us draw 2 PSCs within a site, by the way, right? And the reason we do that is to give you some sort of availability. Now, and we've talked about repointing. This is considered a manual repoint. So if the PSC goes down, you have to intervene and repoint vCenter, right? Depending on your SLA, if you want vCenter authentication at that particular moment. There's also another way to gain availability for the PSCs, and that's adding a load balancer, Adam's favorite thing to do. And what the load balancer buys you is automatic failover. So in the case of PSC1 failing, vCenter is automatically going to repoint to PSC number 2, and you don't have to intervene. You may not even know it happened, right, until you actually go and look through the logs. Any other solution that uses PSC for authentication will also get automatically repointed, whereas the case of manually, you're going to have to take care of not only vCenter, but any other solution that is also using that PSC for authentication. So keep that in mind. The load balancer has a benefit, but at the same time, it also adds more complexity to your environment, because usually you have some other team that manages your network, and you may have to go to them and ask for, you know, help in case of troubleshooting or anything like that. So just keep, especially also with upgrades, you're also going to have to talk to them. So keep that in mind when you consider high availability for the platform services controller.
We got a unique environment in our organization where we just had two big companies merge, right? Our organization, the legacy side, had one SSO domain with two different data centers. This other organization had the same setup, two different data centers.
What version?
6.2.
Okay.
6.0, update 2, and update 3.
Okay.
But we can bring them up to the same version. Now, that being said, we also are using vSAN, which we wanted to take care of the new advantage of the new vSAN 6.6. And we did a new SSO domain, because once these two organizations merge, now we have a new domain, right? We bringing up AD, everything is coming up to one big domain. We wanted to, you know, create one big SSO domain for the new environment and collapse vCenters, meaning not having so many vCenters everywhere, and have just one vCenter on the main data center and then just manage remote servers. How do you recommend it would be the best practice to do that? Obviously, we got to go to 6.5, but what do we do once we go to 6.5? Do we decommission the PSCs, point them to the new SSO? Or how do we export all the tags and everything that we already had in place?
So a couple of ways to export. One, of course, is manually, right? You spin up the new one and you start creating everything by hand. And depending on, how many you have, that could take a while. Plus, that's more error prone. Or you can use something like Power CLI and automate it, export them out to something like a JSON, and then once you have all the config exported out, write another script to import them in.
But should we keep the different vCenters on the different sites, or should we just stay with one big vCenter at the main data center, and then these other sites could be managed through that? What would be the best recommendation for that?
So you can have a management cluster, right, and have that one main vCenter as your management vCenter, and then have other vCenters underneath it, and they could be either in the same SSO domain or in a separate SSO domain, and that way you can break them up that way. So logically.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite answer, it depends, right? I mean, there's no hard and fast rule that VMware will give you, you know, as what you should do in that situation. Look at what you're trying to accomplish. Like if it's better from an operation, or if operational simplicity is the highest priority, that's the requirement you're trying to meet, then having one monolithic vCenter might be the simplest solution, right, to meet that requirement. If it's we want to minimize fault domains, then having separate vCenters is going to be the thing that meets, or the architecture that meets your requirement. So you're just going to have to look at a few things, look at your priorities, and figure out which one of those approaches best meets your needs.
Okay, but then you can't have 6.0 have the same SSO domain as a 6.5, right?
Correct.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
Sure.
In the design that you just drew up here with a load balancer and pointed to all that information there, but we're using NSX for all of our load balancers, which obviously has heavy dependence on vCenter being available. Do you recommend pointing to that type of load balancer, or would you recommend picking up some type of an external physical load balancer?
We support both physical and virtual, but NSX, F5, and NetScaler are what we support.
Okay. In the event that a PSC were to go down or something like that, how does it handle that, or really not an issue? It just maintains what it already knows?
So here, if I can jump in.
Sure.
So if you look at our VMware validated designs, they do this exact architecture. And the way that they protect you from this sort of chicken and the egg scenario is with management clusters, right? They make sure that vCenter, PSCs, and NSX are all established in the management cluster, and then that way below the compute, we sort of minimize that dependency down below in the lower compute layers and that mitigates a lot of that risk. So if you want to see exactly how it's all done, look at the latest VVD, and it walks through and it talks about the risks and the risk mitigations and all that kind of stuff in there, and hopefully that should give you a real detailed response to that.
Thank you. Okay, I think I have a kind of a simple question, but is there any future plans to support something other than AD? We don't use AD, we don't use LDAP in our environment. So is there anything else we can use other than,
What do you use?
TACAX. And I know it's 2017, but we're still using Cisco TACAX.
The first step is admitting no. I'm still kidding. No, that's good feedback. I don't know of anything on the roadmap to support anything additional, but we'll talk to Johnny, the PM, about that and see like if there's demand for that or whatever, and it could be a possibility.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Hi. Last year, June of 2016, we upgraded two separate vCenters to 6L appliance. We unknowingly actually created an unsupported configuration. Both vCenters are embedded. We did link mode, so we can have one single pane of glass that worked fine, worked beautifully. Then down the road, actually just too recently, we found out that's not a supported configuration, link mode with embedded. My question is, can we still split out the embedded into external and then detach link mode?
Yeah, you can. So what you can do is first, since they're within the same SSO domain, this is good. You'll deploy an external PSC, right? And then you're going to use, again, CM SSO util because you've changed your mind, right? And you're going to do a reconfiguration. It's going to repoint vCenter from that embedded PSC to the external PSC, and then it's going to go back and decommission the embedded PSC, making vCenter a standalone. And now you're in that external supported model. And you're going to have to do it for both vCenters.
Understood there. And then I can still, we also change our mind. We don't want to be in link mode. We want to disconnect that.
Are you on Windows?
No, appliance.
You can never register a vCenter with another SSO domain, right?
Correct.
So the comment was you cannot basically take a vCenter and move it from one SSO domain to another. You cannot do that.
Right. So
not today.
Yeah. What?
Oh, he just made the comment, not today.
Okay. So what you're going to, there's the supported method and the unsupported method, or the possible unsupported method. So William Lamb has a blog post out there on how to break link mode. So you may want to go out there and take a look at that. The other way of doing it is basically having to redeploy and just having that embedded standalone and then swinging hosts over with your VMs.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
I'll try to make it quick. Rusty Harrison, international paper, not massive, but pretty big company. And we buy different companies and divest companies like trading cards. That's kind of a business model for larger companies. And we have a very large team of sysadmins, as well as junior guys, mid-level guys, senior, and then architect. Not all of them have the aptitude, and nor do we trust them to get in and do some of the command line utilities like the certificate manager, as well as the rep admin or the RPC admin, the CSS. I can never remember all the acronyms.
Sure.
But it would be really nice as a feature request if y'all could include some of that functionality in the administration link for the PSC. And in addition to that, set up just a few more roles. I know you don't want to expand it to where it's really complex, but like we have administrator at vSphere.global. Well, I don't want to give out that user ID and password to every one of the guys to be able to add something. So if we could have like for the junior guys that just need to follow a document and screenshots, like a add to PSC domain or something like that, user ID, maybe just 2 or 3 levels. And then one more feature request. So possibly some sort of virtual appliance that includes load balancing. That way we don't have to use a third party, or if you could even include it in this virtual appliance. I know that requires a lot of code on your part, but there are other vendors that have done it before, pretty lightweight, and then we wouldn't have to deal with the network team or the other silos. So thank you very much, though.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good feedback.
The good news is that most of that stuff falls under that disclaimer slide, and I can't really talk about it, but it's possible that we're working on all of that. Maybe.
I'm glad I don't say anything.
I just recently rebuilt all of my VCs and PSCs because they were scattered around and I wanted to combine them all together. I had a bunch of problems with time sync, so I rebuilt them like 6 times before I figured out my time sync issue. In the end, I ended up building one PSC and then linking all of the other 5 to that one. Do I have to break all of that to make it a regular replication, linked replication like you showed?
Let's show the mesh.
It's not a full mesh, but it's kind of a mesh.
Yeah.
Or mess.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you're going to use VDC rep admin, and you're going to go to each PSC to see who their replication agreement partners are. And what I typically do, because there's not really a GUI way to view this, I normally whiteboard each one out. So as I look at like PSC number 1, I'll see who the replication partner is, and I'll kind of make note of it, number 2, 3, so on and so forth until I actually have it drawn out. And then if there's a way to clean it up, I will start deleting or creating replication agreements until I get myself out of this type of situation.
Okay. Yeah, because it's not, I ended up using Paris as my primary because that was the one that was having all the time issues. And so I just linked everything to Paris. And then, but now I want to make it right.
So, okay, you mentioned Paris.
There are 6 regional data centers around the world.
Okay, and you have one global SSO domain?
Yes.
Okay, are you experiencing any kind of latency?
No, not yet. But we haven't moved any of our ESX hosts over yet.
Okay. You may want to take a look at your latency between these sites to make sure you're at least within 100 milliseconds. If not, then we recommend at least splitting it out by region. So like US, EMEA, APEC, something like that to mitigate any kind of latency issues.
So I can't have a single SSO domain across globally?
You can. We're not going to, there's nothing stopping you, and it's not a wrong thing to do. But again, you may experience some latency if you're logging in from the US all the way to APEC or something like that.
I have PSCs in all the regions.
Right.
And the vCenters are linked to the local PSC, and they're all in separate sites.
Right.
But we want to have a single pane of glass to manage all of the environments.
Right.
So that's the main reason why I set it up this way.
Yeah, I mean, again, nothing wrong with that, but just keep in mind, depending on, you may have some high latencies between some of the sites.
There's a lot of latency, but we haven't gotten that far in the build yet.
Okay. Well, I'm just giving you a heads up that when you start moving things and you start logging in, you may experience some of that. So what we typically recommend is breaking it up by region just to avoid some of that. I know it doesn't give you the single pane of glass that you're looking for, but it will save you from some of the headaches you may experience.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we were kind of talking about earlier with the 100 milliseconds between vCenters, right? So if you can stay within that, it'll be your best bet. We've talked to some customers that have done the single global and it's been okay, and we've talked to others that it's been a disaster. So your mileage may vary. Test, and make sure that you're going to be happy with it. But in general, we don't necessarily recommend customers do that.
Okay. I'm one of the ones that's T on 5.5 and pretty much T in the defense and moving into 6.5, but I think we can talk offside, but I'm actually thinking, given the looming deprecation of Windows Virtual Center, I'm actually going to be moving to 6.5 after this conference. But my question is on certificate. We have an environment where we have all our users are accessing vCenter through a CNAME. So our cert has to be a multi-domain cert, and actually replacing a certificate with the utility that you currently have in place is next to almost impossible. And I'm wondering how you could facilitate that for me.
Yeah, so I'm not going to give you too detailed of an answer because I'm going to talk about it in my session tomorrow afternoon. I think it's at 2:30, certificate management for mere mortals, or we can talk after this.
Okay.
But the gist of it is we don't support either wildcard or multi-SAN certificates in 6X. So the way that you're accessing vCenter today will not work when you go to 6.5 or 6.0. So we'll have to talk about how you can move forward. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
In the spirit of keeping things simple, like you guys talked about, most of your drawings involve 2 PSCs per site. Is there, for lack of a better term, do you see PSCs crap the bed that often? Or, I mean, if I have 2 sites, like regular production site and DR site, and I stand up a single PSC in both sides, if I were to lose one, from what you talked about, I could, basically redeploy it and repoint it at the one at my DR site. So there's not a big risk if you have 2 sites and only putting one at each site. Am I correct in saying that?
So you can't repoint across sites.
But if I lost a PSC, I could redeploy it and point it to the one that is currently functioning, right?
Yeah. So if one, basically it depends on your SLA, right? If PSC1 goes down and it's in one site and PSC2 is still up, yeah, you're just going to go to PSC2, decommission 1, and then spin up number 1 again, and you're back up and running.
And then, let's say I had to reboot a PSC in the middle of the day for some reason. All I'm really losing at that point is being able to log into that vCenter for the 2 minutes it takes for that PSC to bounce, right?
Exactly.
And if I had 2 of them without a load balancer, I'd have to manually repoint it anyway, right?
Yeah, within a site, if you had 2 of them, you'd have to manually repoint. So we have customers who, let's say, for example, when they do upgrades, right? The first thing you upgrade is the PSC first, all the PSCs within an SSO domain. Don't go and upgrade one PSC and then go upgrade the vCenter pointing to it and then go back up. You're going to get yourself in a mess. So upgrade all your PSCs first and then your VCs. So what they wind up doing is they'll repoint VC to that secondary PSC within a site, upgrade that PSC, again, repoint vCenter across, upgrade that PSC, and then finally vCenter. It's just they want to maximize vCenter uptime as much as possible.
It's a matter of balancing that versus simplicity, because it seems like if you do 2, you almost should include a load balancer with that, and as I'm thinking about it. But
again, it depends on, do you want to add the complexity or do you want to handle the failover?
Sure, yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep.
Real quick before your question, I know we're almost out of time and you can get your question. I wanted to explain this diagram because I realized that I drew this up here. And this, to be clear, this is something that the gentleman was kind of describing. This is something that we don't want you to do, right? This would be a hub and spoke, right? What happens if we lose Paris in this situation? Now we've got a whole bunch of island PSCs out there. So I drew this to just illustrate that hub and spoke topology is bad in this particular situation.
And if you try to go in and think, okay, well, I can at least get this up and running and start creating replication agreements, that's when we start getting into a mess, right? Because now you have these, as Adam's drawing them, but what happens when I start adding more to this mess? You start to have to create a bunch of replication agreements and it starts to get completely out of hand, right? And again, the PSCs are meant to be nice and lean, so fewer replication agreements as possible, and that's why we recommend the nice linear topology.
Go ahead.
I just upgraded to 6.5 update 1 to VCSA actually 10 days ago or 14 days ago. My personal experience, it is a very positive experience. I mean, everything is working much better, except Active Directory login, which they couldn't open. The ticket we opened up that the groups were not resolving properly, and they said the only way to work around it is create as an LDAP source. Now, they never came back and fixed that issue yet. But my question is that the way we have upgraded the PSCs and vCenters, that the way the upgrade works, you leave the original one in place, you create an upgrade path, and it takes over the name, IP address, everything is beautiful. But one thing that, is it going to be like this going forward? So that means that we have to keep from the inventory object-wise, if you have, let's say, if you're naming PSC01 and you want to name the same one that you're upgrading to 6.5 as PSC01, you need to rename before you start upgrading the original one on the inventory object. you know, because when you're upgrading, everything is fine because it's only on the IP address, on the DNS, you're going to keep the names correctly. But
right.
on the inventory object, all of a sudden you have, let's say, old PSC still as the name that you're using as the DNS name, and the new one is completely a different name, or -1, or however you want to do it.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to note, as we're getting buzzed off the stage, but it's really the display name of the object in the inventory.
Yeah.
The FQDN and everything stays the same.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that could probably be improved, but one of the reasons it's that way, at least in my opinion, is so that if you need to roll back, it's easier. There's
Exactly.
fewer steps.
Yeah, I mean that display name, like you said, you can either change it before, put it like a -old, or you could deploy with a new one and then go back after the fact and change it. Sure.
That's right. It's something that I noticed, and the next one I did upgrade, I renamed the first one as an inventory object, and that's
Okay. All right.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much. Hopefully this was beneficial.